Welcome to Revival, the show that sets out to recreate life in the past, with stories and challenges that reveal new insights into each era. This is hands-on history as you've never seen it before. This week, we're at Netheravon, on the edge of Salisbury Plain, to tell an extraordinary story. Over 90 years ago, many of our finest pilots from the First World War were trained here. Now, their stories are largely forgotten. But today, Revival is going to bring the world of the fighter race back to life. The First World War from 1914 to 18 was the bloodiest in human history, costing a staggering 10 million lives. We all tend to think of it as a battle of the trenches, where thousands of men died every day in places like the Somme. But in fact, there was a place where your chances of being killed was even greater: in the air.
Flying back then really was a new technology. At the start of the war, the newly formed Royal Flying Corps had just 200 planes. By the end, it had nearly 3,000. Above the battle lines, the plane proved its worth as the eyes and ears of the army during those early reconnaissance flights. Ex-para pilot Charlie Shea Simmons is going to recreate that experience for me today in his Tiger Moth.
Hi, Jules.
Hey, Charlie. Good to see you. Yeah. This is a fabulous looking aeroplane.
Yep, it's a Tiger Moth. And whilst this was built many years after the First World War, this is the nearest we can get to you experiencing what it was like in those days.
Do you get a real sense of what it was like flying back then?
Marginally. You have to bear in mind that in those days, the guys had minimal training. They didn't understand a lot of the things about flying. The engines were unreliable, and they were difficult to fly. They really, really were. You didn't have a throttle as such. You just blipped the throttle. It was going flat out all the time. It was either going flat out or stop. So when you would come in and land, you had to blip the ignition switch to actually reduce the power of the thing. What?
But what were their overall capabilities like? I mean, in the sense of, in those early days in the war, you'd have to do 101 other things other than just fly.
Absolutely right. And of course, what you've got to bear in mind is it started off purely as a reconnaissance thing. And in the retreat from Mons, it was the Royal Flying Corps and the information they brought back as to the whereabouts of the German troops, which was amazingly helpful to the British High Command. And that was where the Royal Flying Corps really sort of earned their colours, if you like.
But the great thing for us today, then, is we've got this chance to get a sense of that environment, haven't we?
Absolutely right. Of course you have. And we're going to fly together. And maybe you'll just try and think of what it was like, you know, with the wind in the wires and, you know, eyes watering behind the goggles and all this kind of thing, you know. You'll get a very good sense of it, I'm sure. Right, here we go, dear boy.
Can't wait, mate. Cannot wait.
Out of airfields across the south, from Newland in Cornwall to Walmer in Kent, recon pilots risk their lives at speeds of just 60 to 70 miles an hour, mapping the ebb and flow of the enemy lines. I'm about to get a taste of how that must have felt.
Right, here we go. We're just taxiing across the airfield, turning into the wind. Ready for takeoff. We're in the air. This is just sensational. You really do get a sense of that environment that Charlie and I were talking about. It's very noisy, if you can probably tell. And it's very, very windy. One thing I didn't appreciate was how slow these aircraft were. It's no wonder these aircraft made such easy targets from the ground. But you can also see why they were so invaluable to the army. You really can't see the whole world from up here. Of course, there's no radio in this aeroplane. I can't even talk to Charlie. And I have no chance of talking to the rest of the troops on the ground. The only way for it was to scroll up a piece of paper, tie it to a stone, and literally tuck it over the edge and And hate, of course, that your side picked it up.
That was absolutely amazing.
You didn't enjoy that, did you?
And nobody was trying to kill me, apart from you.
Someone who knows all too well what it's like to be shot at in the air is ex-World War II Spitfire ace Doug Gregory, who won the Distinguished Flying Cross for his bravery. Now 82, Doug's passion is not the agile, high-speed fighter planes he served in, but something altogether more basic.
For any student of the First World War and the planes that flew in it, the SE-5 is probably the most iconic. Now, Doug, what's it like to fly?
Well, this one is rather beautiful, but of course it's not an original SE-5. It's a copy which I made some years ago.
And how do you think it performed as a fighter?
Extremely well. It was probably the best thing we ever produced. Right up to the end of the war, it was the greatest.
And do you think if you'd have been flying back then, it would have given you the kind of advantage you'd have been looking for?
I'd have probably died of fright, I should think. How they ever did it in the Great War, I don't know. Open cockpit, 18,000 feet, freezing cold, and somebody shooting at you. That can't be much fun, can it? But somehow or other they did it, and I've admired them ever since.
But the men behind the machines played just as important a role. They were recruited from the Royal Artillery and other army units, and it was their job to set up mobile airfields behind the front lines and to keep those planes in the air. And our man on the ground is mechanic Cliff Skinner.
Cliff, this is yet another fantastic aeroplane, but very different from what I've just seen. What is it?
This is a French design aircraft known as the Newport 17C Scout.
Was it common that we would use French aircraft rather than our own?
Not common, but they did have some good ideas.
And how did this plane fare against the opposition?
It was very good. It was very manoeuvrable. All rotary engines were very, very good at turning and manoeuvrability.
So when a plane like this touched down, Cliff, what would you be expected to do?
The first thing I would do would be ask him, have you been in contact with the enemy? And if it had been, you would immediately caress the actual fuselage.
You'd caress it?
Yeah, you would. You know, the hand,
Check it.
the feel of the hand,
Yeah.
checks for any lumps, bumps, bullet holes,
Yeah.
this sort of thing.
And presumably the kind of stresses and strains of kind of tight turns and diving out of enemy fire and all that sort of thing would presumably stretch all this stuff and loosen it all.
It certainly does, yes. As I say, if it has made enemy contact, then a team of mechanics would come out and do an absolute stringent test on the aircraft, airframe, rigging, engine, absolutely everything.
And if I were a pilot, I would hope very much that you would be looking after my airplane.
Certainly, sir.
To keep one plane in the air took 5 men on the ground. But who were the men who flew the machines? The man who can tell us is Julian Farrance.
Julian. Hello. This looks for all the world like I've just stepped back into northern France 80-odd years ago. This is fantastic, isn't it?
Well, thank you very much. And normally, of course, if we're in the chateau, I'd be able to offer you a glass of champagne. Here, I'm afraid, not even a cup of tea. Sorry about that.
But that does rather play, doesn't it, to the kind of stereotypical image of the glamorous fighter pilot that emerged from this era. But is it true?
Pretty much, yes. You will always hear that the Royal Flying Corps lads had splendid billets, staying in chateaus, great tuck, drinking champagne and eating gammon steaks, marvellous. And on the whole, that's pretty much true, quite a lot of the time. But the thing to bear in mind is that a pilot in the Royal Flying Corps, an observer in the Royal Flying Corps, they've got a very low life expectancy. Their mortality rate is enormously high, much higher, in fact, than even infantry subalterns on the Western Front.
But how much training were these guys given before they would be sent up against the Germans?
Well, it depends on what point in the war you're talking about. If you were back in the early stages in 1914, a lot of these chaps had been training before the war and been pilots before the war, so they'd got quite a lot of training. But by 1917, when they've been taking an absolute pasting, then the young chaps that were being sent over had sometimes no more than 6 or 7 hours training in the aircraft, and that's, of course, just sheer murder.
But where were these young guys drawn from?
Most of the blokes being pulled into the Corps back then were coming from the Royal Engineers or from the Royal Artillery. They're the youngest, they're the keenest, they are the best of the best.
But you look like one of them yourself with this fantastic wax moustache.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, it's absolutely regulation, you know, up until 1916. If you shave your moustache off, you can get court-martialed.
So I'd have had to grow a moustache myself.
Absolutely. I could lend you the wax if you like.
There's no doubt that bravery was the #1 requirement for those World War I pilots. But soon High Command was to ask even more of them.
The more I learn about the men of the Royal Flying Corps, the more I have to admire them. And it's no surprise that as the war dragged on, hundreds of them were being killed to gain that vital intelligence on these reconnaissance missions. Every line drawn on a map could be measured in tens, if not hundreds of lives. And soon they were being hunted down relentlessly. So join me after the break when we join forces with the Hunters, the fighter pilots. Welcome back to Revival, where this week we've taken to the skies to tell the untold story behind the world's first fighter races, men who fought and flew in the First World War. Today, I'm discovering what it was really like to be part of the Royal Flying Corps, the men and the machines who changed the world forever.
These planes look pretty old-fashioned to us now, but 90 years ago they were at the cutting edge of aviation technology. From their spying missions over enemy lines, they sent back vital information which saved hundreds of lives on the ground. But they became victims of their own success. Their intelligence was so valuable that each side tried to stop the other. They had to find a way to get guns in the air, and the fighter plane was born. Arming planes was a specialist job, and with the help of pilot Andy Long, armourer Richard Knight is going to show me how they did it.
Now, Richard, getting these heavyweight infantry machine guns onto these lightweight aeroplanes must have been quite an achievement.
It was. The actual weight of the machine gun was 28 pounds. But you've got to remember, this started off as an infantry weapon that was used on the ground. But to get it onto the aircraft, basically, unnecessary items were removed from the gun itself.
So what have we got here, Richard? I'm going to call it a magazine, but you're going to probably tell me it's something different.
It's called a pan.
Okay.
The pan basically is the magazine that holds the ammunition for the Lewis machine gun.
And this does look like the most fantastic object, I have to say. Can you just show us how it fits
Certainly.
together?
You have a post.
Right.
The pan locates on top of the post.
Yeah.
And he's locked down on top of the gun itself.
And that's it?
That's it.
So, Andy, what would you do then? If you were flying along, you've run out of ammunition in how many seconds?
About 15 seconds.
You've got 15 seconds worth of ammunition in there, and you've got to reload while somebody's on your tail, trying to chase you, trying to shoot you down.
That's right.
How easy was it?
Well, before the Foster mount came in, you'd actually have to stand up in the cockpit and wedge the stick between your legs and try and change the pans over like that.
So you're flying by the seat of your pants, aren't you? Almost.
Literally, or the soles of your feet, more like. You really are standing up.
So what was the solution?
The solution basically was to find a suitable machine gun that could be synchronised through a hydraulic system to fire through the propeller itself.
So how effective was this new technology then?
It was fantastic. The Vickers machine gun was a belt-fed weapon. Basically, it meant that it could hold more rounds, between 350 and 400 rounds. It still had a rate of fire of 500 rounds a minute, so you were still limited to so many seconds in the air.
But the fact that it was actually pointing through the propellers and the pilot, Andy here, could actually see who he was shooting at every second of the way, it transforms the old sort of kite, the old string box, into a kind of war-winning weapon.
Absolutely, it certainly did give the Bosch a bloody nose.
But the same guns that turned pilots into aces were also deadly from the ground. anti-aircraft gun expert James Nice has his eye on the sights.
James, I've learned a lot about aircraft today and a lot about pilots, but for you guys on the ground, you're as vulnerable as everybody else.
That's right, it's much easier to destroy an aircraft on the ground than in the air. So each Royal Flying Corps airfield would have ground defence anti-aircraft guns, such as this one.
And this looks to me like our old friend the Lewis that we've seen mounted on the planes.
It is indeed, mounted here on a cartwheel, standard improvised mounting during the Great War. And the Lewis is very good for anti-aircraft work. You've got a lovely centre of balance here, so it's very manoeuvrable on the stand. If you'd like to get behind the gun, you'll see.
It is, what, an 18-pound weapon normally, isn't it?
It's up to 30 pounds with a magazine on. So if you tuck that into your shoulder, and then this other hand goes across the butt here.
Oh, okay, there, yep.
And then you're sighting through that aperture there, and on the front of the weapon you've got a deflector sight. If your target is below 500 feet, you're going to use that inner ring, and between 500 and 3,000 feet, use the outer ring.
And what was the effective range of this?
About 1,000 yards maximum on anti-aircraft work.
And how effective, I mean, hitting a moving target, how effective was it?
Well, you've got to remember that these aircraft are flying at little more than 100 miles an hour. They're going to be coming in low to attack an airfield. You think about an aircraft, there's actually a lot of square yardage of target there.
Yeah.
So you would always open fire, you always hope to hit, because even if you don't shoot him down in flames, you're going to cause some damage, which he's got to go back, repair. It may only take that aircraft out of action for half an hour, but you've done your bit.
So are there any statistics that would tell us how effective this was as an anti-aircraft weapon?
There are no statistics. For a lot of kills, there'll be several people claiming that they shot down the aircraft, and a classic example is the Red Baron in April 1980.
Von Richthofen?
That's right, that's right. Initially it was an RFC pilot who claimed the kill. Now it's thought that it was very probably an Australian Lewis gun on the ground which actually shot him down.
That must have been one of the most important shots of the war.
Indeed, but the Red Baron was flying very low, he was flying down towards a valley, so it was an ideal shot for a gun at this time.
To those World War I pilots, it must have seemed as if everyone was trying to kill them. So before I take to the skies again for the ultimate dogfight experience, I'm doing some homework on aerial tactics.
As you can see, I'm now fully kitted up and ready to take my part in the air. But it's easy to forget that underneath the glamour of a uniform, men half my age and certainly half my size were fighting and dying in a war that was rewriting the rules of air combat. And this is what they came up with. It's called Fighting in the Air. And it was written in 1917 to encapsulate all the things that they learned after 3 long years of war. Now, Doug, this was written 30 years before the war you fought in, but were the lessons in it still applicable in your time?
Oh, I should say so. If you're fighting the enemy, first surprise him, then destroy him. Chase him until you have got him.
And it's that mechanical, isn't it?
Oh, it is indeed, yes. You don't think too much about it while it's happening. You're concentrating on what you're doing. There's very little glamour in it. You realise that if you don't succeed, you're going to be dead.
I mean, there must be nothing like being
You've got to get in the air to find out. And then, of course, if somebody is attacking you, you will know all about it.
Cheers, Charlie.
Anyway, young sir, get that on you.
Here we go again.
Yeah, there we go again.
This time round, Charlie and I won't have the skies to ourselves. The 2 green SE5s are on our side. The silver Newport is playing the hunt, trying to hunt me down. He won't actually be firing at me. At least, that's what he told me.
We're just climbing up to try and find our other aircraft. And already it's pretty damn hard to find where you are. We've just joined up with the other aircraft. It's very, very, very confusing. And even though realistically we're moving quite slowly through the air, it's all relative. Planes come and go at an alarming speed. Now somewhere up here is a Newport that's going to be chasing me. God knows where he is. I can't see it. You just do get a sense of how vulnerable you are, even when the skies are relatively empty. Right, here comes the Newport. He's on our tail. Tally-ho, here we go. Charlie's got to work pretty hard here to get him away from us. Now, what kind of chance we have had? I don't know. He's right on it. This is the most extraordinary experience. I think that's how we might have lost him. We've lost the SE5. Obviously engaged elsewhere. He's coming back at us again. He's working very hard to keep on it. We're literally just a few feet off the ground. This is a dangerous place for an aircraft to be in a dogfight because you've got literally nowhere to go. I think today we might have lived to fight another day. But that was not the case for so many thousand airmen. Okay, Charlie, let's head for home. And we're back at home for tea and crumpets. Thank you, Charlie.
That was absolutely extraordinary. Okay, we weren't being shot at, but my God, we were being chased. And just throwing this thing around in that fantastic 3D space, your disorientation is terrific. You just hardly know where you are. And trying to spot the other aircraft locked in here with all this gear, just trying to turn and view them was almost impossible. And I wasn't even having to fly it. For those guys up there who were on the front line day after day after day, it must have been absolutely terrifying. For me, today has been the most extraordinary experience. To actually get up there and experience what these young guys were up against has been truly humbling. And whilst it's easy to just celebrate the aces, you mustn't forget, of course, those other tens of thousands of young men who gave their lives just to keep the Allied advantage in the air going. And it's thanks to people like Doug and Charlie and the rest of the gang that the spirit of those men is kept very much alive.